Welcome to the Wild Crone Wisdom podcast with your host Vinutha Mohan. In this episode, we explore our inherent nature of making up stories all the time about ourselves, others, and the world. Many times, these stories keep us stuck, angry, and resentful. Is there a way to disrupt this pattern? The spiritual teacher Byron Katie asks a poignant question. Who would you be without your stories? The hippocampus in our brain is a puzzle piece assembler, and it is always trying to make sense of what is happening to us. It does that by assembling whatever information it can infer from the sensory inputs and filling in the rest with the data it has collected from past experiences. So, if the data from the past is fairly healthy, then it gives you a healthy interpretation of life. If, on the other hand, the data from the past is replete with unprocessed wounds and scars from the past, it gives you a very distorted image of what is happening in the present. So, at the end of the day, your story is only as good as the lens with which you view and interpret it. But then again, what happens if we drop the story altogether? Is it even possible to do that, given that our brains are constantly sorting and labeling things all day long? Of course, we have to make sense of our experiences in order to survive, navigate our way through life, make decisions, and take actions. So, how do we navigate this territory? Ideally speaking, as children, it would have been wonderful to have an attuned and emotionally intelligent parent who can help us make healthy stories of our lives. Parents and other primary caregivers are the first set of people who help a child form the lens with which a child views herself, himself, others, and the world. An attuned parent approaches this with curious compassion and explores the child's inner territory with him or her. In the absence of healthy attunement with primary caregivers, the child tends to form a distorted version of reality, and many times from an egocentric perspective, meaning taking it all personally. With such a distorted lens, it can become very painful to navigate life as an adult. As adults, we tend to believe the stories we make up in our heads about ourselves and others as the gospel truth and live off of these stories. This can very often lead us to so much unnecessary suffering. The shame researcher Brené Brown invites us to be aware of this pattern of human behavior and to always fact check our stories. She urges us to own our stories and have the courage to check it out with our partners, friends, clients, children, siblings, parents, and everyone else who is important to us. When I fact check a story, like this in my experience, I have found that 9 out of 10 times I'm completely wrong in my assumptions, and once in a while, I may have been partially right. In my experience, there has never been a time when I made up a story about another and been 100% right. Stories are dangerous distortions of life when not fact checked. One of the greatest ways to show respect for another is to fact check your stories about them. It is not guilty until proven innocent, but the other way around. I once had a client who had held on to a story about her partner for over 20 years, and all it took was 30 minutes in therapy to undo the misunderstanding. What was the real issue? Well, they never ever had a productive talk about it. Each was walking around with a story in their head about the other. I see this pattern all the time with people walking around with stories and scripts in their heads about themselves, others, and the world. Social media, news, advertisements use stories all the time to manipulate us in all aspects of our life. Shadow storytellers use stories to cast a spell on us and to distort our reality. Our history books are filled with such distorted stories and its consequences. From a different vantage point, our stories are also sacred. Stories of resilience, hope, courage, compassion, faith, recovery, healing, connection at all can inspire us into healthy action, motivate us to try harder, and move us into compassion and connection. A healthy story is a sacred story. Brene Brown says that our stories are sacred and one must earn our trust to hear them. Therefore, we have to also be careful as to who we are sharing our vulnerable and sacred stories with. Indiscriminate sharing can often hurt us and lead us to shame and humiliation. At the end of the day, I believe that all stories are still only partial truths. Since we can never understand and comprehend reality in its entirety, nor stop ourselves from making up stories, the best we can do is to fact check them, remembering that our perception about something is one of 1,000 other perceptions about the same thing. What would happen if we just started with only known facts? He called, she didn't. She came, they didn't. She sent an email, they haven't responded yet. He applied for a job, waiting for a response. Just the simple facts. No filling in the blanks without fact checking or healthy introspection. When in doubt, always ask for clarification. And finally, after you have painstakingly stitched a coherent and accurate story of your life, let it all go. The image that comes to mind is of Tibetan monks spending days painstakingly creating a beautiful mandala sand painting with such intricate details, with so much concentration and dedication, and then within minutes of completing it, sweeping it all away with the same dedication and concentration, letting it all go. Who would you be without your stories? Find out for yourself. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wild Crone Wisdom with your host, Vinutha Mohan. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist from the Bay Area, California, specializing in trauma and attachment repair. I'm also a certified EMDR specialist and a certified shamanic practitioner. In this podcast series, we delve into the journey of our spiritual essence having a human experience. While many social scientists study human emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and others explore transcendental experiences, few bridge the gap to help embody the spiritual wisdom in everyday life. I call this the psycho-spiritual path. Through this podcast, I hope to share bite-sized practical insights for navigating life as an empowered sovereign being. If you found this episode valuable, we'd greatly appreciate your support. Please consider rating, reviewing, commenting, and subscribing on your podcast platform to help us reach a wider audience. You can explore more of my writings on Medium by following the link in the show notes. We'd also love to hear about your experience, so feel free to share your thoughts with us at wildcronewisdompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for being part of our journey. Please be advised, the information provided in the Wild Crone Wisdom podcast is intended for general information purposes only. Vinutha Mohan is a licensed therapist and healer. However, the content shared in this podcast does not replace or constitute professional advice, therapy, or counseling. It is essential to consult with a qualified mental health professional for personalized guidance regarding your unique circumstances. Thank you.